You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we're talking about Las Vegas and the Rat Pack. And now, here's Julian, Arthur, and Steve.
Hey, guys. So given that we're recording this before Oscar of the show Sunday, I thought maybe we'd take 2 minutes and predict who will win in the top 5 categories. Shall we start with Best Picture?
Yes, Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer. Mike?
Oppenheimer.
Okay, there's definitely a consensus. Let's go with Best Actress.
Lily Gladstone.
You know, I finally saw Killers of the Flower Moon, and she's definitely in it. It for my money, it's not the most dynamic performance. She spends most of the movie kind of in a drug-induced stupor, but I think that the enthusiasm for her being the first Native American nominated will catapult her. Julian,
who else
what do you
would win it if not her, Steve?
Well, I would vote for Emma Stone in a hot second, but that's just me.
Okay, next, Julian.
Well, I'd go with Meryl Streep, but she's not nominated.
Good one.
All right, I'm going with Emma.
Emma.
I'm doing Emma also.
Okay, Emma. There we go. Locked and loaded. Okay, for Best Actor,
Cillian Murphy.
Cillian Murphy. Mr. Murphy.
I'm going to have to say Cillian Murphy, but my hope was for Paul Giamatti.
My hope was the same way, but I think that him winning at the SAG Awards was a big thing. So,
Love Paul Giamatti. Does everybody know that his father was the commissioner of baseball, Bart Giamatti, who banned Pete Rose from baseball? How about that? Okay.
How about that? Best, let's see, Best Supporting Actress.
The girl from Holdovers. I forget her name. What is her name, guys?
Holdovers.
Heavyset girl.
Divine Joy Randolph.
Yes, that's my
Divine
choice.
Joy Randolph. I definitely think will be Divine Joy Randolph. Julian.
The divine one.
The Divine Miss Julian. I miss Randolph.
I beg your pardon, sir.
And finally, Best Supporting Actor.
Robert Downey Jr.
Yes, likewise.
Without a doubt.
There's virtually no suspense in the Oscars.
But no. Finally, there's one more. Best Director. Nolan.
I think this is Nolan's year.
This is Nolan's year.
Well, I remember Philip Nolan, the man without a country. But okay, I'll go with Nolan too.
And I remember Lloyd Nolan, who was in a lot of movies.
A lot.
But then some people are also predicting that it might be Yorgos for Poor Things. Might upset everyone.
Nolan. Onward to Las Vegas and the Rat Pack, guys.
So who wants to go first here? I mean, I can talk about Las Vegas till the cows come home, but I will defer to you gentlemen because you have some inside information.
A little backstory into Las Vegas from history that I'm aware of, and that is that pre-Depression days, the 20s into 1910s and all that, it was really a nothing kind of place. They did build a hotel here or there. They did have gambling. And then along came the Depression. In 1931, along came something called Boulder Dam, which would eventually be called Hoover Dam, and brought in thousands of workers to work on Boulder Dam. And that's when they started building up what is now known as downtown Las Vegas, put in gambling casinos, put in theaters and things that the workers could enjoy. And that's when it started. It started in the 1930s, becoming known. Beyond that point, it went into an incarnation of the 40s, and post-war, even though during the war there were a lot of soldiers who would come into downtown Las Vegas and gamble when they were in L.A. or there was a base out there too in the Vegas area. But then came, of course, 1946, 47, and Bugsy Siegel and the mob from New York, Meyer Lansky and some guys, as depicted in a terrific movie called Bugsy, which Barry Levinson directed. It took over what was the beginning of the Flamingo Hotel on the Strip. That was the first hotel really on the Strip, apart from something called the El Rancho Vegas, which was kind of like not a big deal. But the mob took over the Flamingo. Bugsy Siegel, Ben Siegel built it up, and the Flamingo was a big deal. But he spent so much money on it, and so much of the mob's money on it, that they eventually killed him. If you saw the movie Bugsy, that's portrayed, that's depicted.
Well, he went over budget, and they were getting very upset with him.
Way over budget. It went way over budget. But what his idea was to bring in the big-time talent from show business and book them into this hotel, and all of the stars would come, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, that was the model for all of the rest of the hotels that built up the Strip in Las Vegas. In 1960, along comes the Rat Pack, and worldwide publicity comes to Las Vegas. It was the Sands Hotel. And so I'll go from there. So next, Julian or Steve?
Well, the original Rat Pack was not the Sinatra group, even though he was a member of it. It all started with Humphrey Bogart, and they had a great group of people, of Bogart and Errol Flynn and Ava Gardner and Nat King Cole and Judy Garland. It was an incredible group that Sinatra was a part of, but Bogart was the man.
And Lauren Bacall.
When Bogart died, Sinatra and Lauren Bacall became an item, and they got engaged. But the engagement was supposed to be kept between Bacall and Sinatra, and somehow Luella Parsons found out. Sinatra was convinced it was Bacall, broke it off, and that was the end of their engagement. Sinatra then takes over as the leader of the pack. And Steve, you can go on from there if you want. I can come back whenever you want.
Well, in 1960, I saw Ocean's 11 in the theater with my parents. And about a few months later, we took our first trip to Las Vegas, or at least I took my first trip to Las Vegas. I was 8. And I thought I was on a giant film set. I've talked about this before. We actually stayed at the Sands. In those days, all of their hotel bungalows were named after famous racetracks. I was staying at the Hialeah. I had my little soldiers in a bag, and I went out on this lawn. I'm playing with my soldiers on the lawn of the Sands Hotel. That was back then. But I thought Las Vegas was a giant playground. Obviously, it's been known for decades as an adult playground, but it just was kind of fun to hang out with all these adults who were playing games. Now, I couldn't go into the casino, but I would stay in the area right next to the casino, which had these chairs, and I would watch all the slot machines for my mother. And if I saw a guy playing and playing and playing and playing and not touching it, not winning a jackpot, I'd say, "Mom, play that machine." She'd put a quarter in, jackpot. Play that machine, another quarter, jackpot. I became quite a shill for my mother, and we were a good team together. And the nice thing about it is she gave me her winnings. So I ended up with a lot of change. That was very, very much a formative moment for me, because ever since then, I've gone to Las Vegas probably 100 times, and I always have fun.
And I'll go back to the Rat Pack. The name of it apparently was given by Lauren Bacall, who was the wife of Humphrey Bogart, and they lived in Holmby Hills. And the group of Sinatra and all these guys would congregate and smoke and drink and play cards and do whatever at Holmby Hills, and she dubbed it the Rat Pack. Along those lines comes Peter Lawford, who finds a script called Ocean's 11 in the late 1950s. He goes to Sinatra. At that time, his brother-in-law, John Kennedy, is about to run for the president of the United States. All of this gets involved at the same time. And it turns out that they decide to make the movie. Sinatra's going to do this movie with the so-called Rat Pack of Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford, and Sammy Davis Jr. All of these guys were in the movie, in the movie Ocean's 11. And so they would shoot the movie in Las Vegas in 1959, late 59, or I think it was 59 because they had the New Year's scene.
59.
Yeah. And so what happened was what started out to be just a movie, a terrific concept for a script, turns out to be that Sinatra is appearing at the Sands at the same time. And he is joined by his fellow stars, co-stars, those mentioned, Sammy Davis, Joey Bishop, Dean Martin. And at night, they joined him on stage. And that began this historic event of the so-called Rat Pack on stage, drinking and having a good time, having a party. Nothing like that had ever happened before. And it attracted crowds like they'd never seen before. And all of the stars from Hollywood came in and joined. And it was a great, great thing. So they would work there at night, and they'd make the movie during the day.
Arthur, what do you think was the national or international attraction to these particular actors and singers? What was it about them that created kind of an aura of coolness? I mean, what would you say if you had to nail it?
At that time, it was just, its so-called age of innocence came about in the 50s, post-war. But it was a great attitude of cockiness and having a good time and partying, and the girls, or they called them the broads, everybody was having a good time. So the age of innocence was really never so innocent. We all understand that. As a matter of fact, Eddie Fisher, who became a friend, was part of the unofficial Rat Pack, as was Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh. There were a lot of people who were in this so-called Rat Pack. But we all know of just those who were in the movie and who appeared at the Sands. And by the way, JFK, who was the most glamorous figure to probably ever run for president, was basically one of them too. He was one of the guys, and he came to a show at the Sands. He was sitting in the front row. He was announced. This was during the campaign. He wasn't president yet, but that's what it was. It was the guys, the girls. It was fun. It was having a good time. It was. Nobody really cared about, a lot of serious things. It was just having a ball. That's not happening today. It hasn't happened for a long time. But along with that, and I think Julian will agree, there was a glamour to it. They were all wearing tuxedos. The women were wearing great dresses. They were just looked beautiful. It was a great time. And here was the epitome of it in what became known as the Rat Pack, on stage every night, having no script, just going about their stuff.
Well, it's interesting, Arthur, you say no script. According to some people, of all people, Joey Bishop wrote most of the sketches and ideas that they had, supposedly. Whether that's true or not, who knows? That's the problem. I've complained bitterly about the Internet, because you can get a lot of information, but you really can't take a lot of it to the bank. Anyhow, the original person that Lawford supposedly wanted was William Holden, not Sinatra, when he bought the rights. And anyhow, Sinatra heard about it, read it, wanted to do it. And, of course, as you said, he did do it. Sinatra didn't like the name Rat Pack. He didn't like it at all. He wanted it to be called the Klan until they realized it could get mixed up with the Ku Klux Klan. So that was out. And then he wanted to call it the Summit. That's what he liked, the Summit.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But the Rat Pack became that catch name. But I will say that Joey Bishop, though, would write an outline, if you will,
of course,
of what would happen. And everything was improvised, including when they dragged the bar on stage and they all began drinking. It was a party.
I also heard that Sinatra's quip when he heard the story of Ocean's 11 was, "Forget the movie. Let's pull the job."
Yeah, let's do the job.
Well, it was a great idea, great heist. The second half of that film, as Marty Scorsese says, the second half of that film is a time capsule of Vegas in 1960. It's fantastic. I could see that 100 times.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the thing is, today when you drive down Las Vegas Boulevard, it's wall-to-wall concrete. You don't see the desert. But
Right.
back in 1960, there were large open spaces of desert between the casinos. And I remember when I was there walking in subsequent visit throughout the early 60s, I would go back there, and I was a teenager, and you could walk from the Flamingo to the Desert Inn, but you'd walk by desert. And I took my first cab ride ever on Las Vegas Boulevard, and it was and downtown Las Vegas, you could cruise. And in fact, back early in my 20s, when my friends and I would then drive to Las Vegas, we would cruise Fremont Street. Now, you can't cruise Fremont Street anymore because it's covered and it's become a mall. So they took away all that cruising activity. By the way, the name Fremont Street is named after the great American explorer John C. Fremont, who apparently was the first American to enter that valley and kind of discover Las Vegas.
There is a great story in the early, about 1964, I believe. Caesar's Palace became the first kind of hotel that became the new Las Vegas. It was the first on the Strip that was really built, large hotel. It was just as, opulent as you could possibly get. And they offered Eddie Fisher a contract for 16 weeks of his time a year. This is after he was divorced from Elizabeth Taylor. They offered Eddie 6 gross points in Caesar's Palace for his pay. And he opted not to do it because he couldn't stand the fact that Elizabeth Taylor just divorced him from Cleopatra. So he associated Cleopatra with Caesar, and because of that, he turned down that deal.
As long as he had a good reason.
He had a good reason.
Anyhow, Sinatra supposedly owned 9% of the Sands and always had the ability to gamble and run up a debt, and they never worried about it. But then Howard Hughes and his company bought the Sands, and they wouldn't let Sinatra have that any longer. He could not run up this debt. And Sinatra, in a peak, as he was known to get, went to Caesar's Palace, left the Sands, and probably was one of their biggest losses by doing just that, by not keeping him at the Sands Hotel.
And of course, the Sands today is but a memory. It's now the site of the Venetian Hotel,
yeah,
which is about the size of Mount Everest in terms of hotels. We've stayed there many times, and the hotels have changed over the years. When you, like Scorsese says, when you walk through the end of Ocean's 11 and throughout Ocean's 11, it's a time capsule. First of all, you hear the sound of money. And the funny thing about slot machines today is you no longer put coins in slot machines. It's all done with your credit card or a voucher. And there's no coin. You win a jackpot, the money doesn't come flying out of the slot machine. It's handed to you in the form of paper money.
Well, but bells go off. All kinds of things go off.
Bells do go off, but I miss the whole sound of the. But some things have not changed in Las Vegas. You go by a hot crap table, you hear the same yelling you heard in 1960. Come 11, come a 7, make that point, all that stuff, all that crap.
There was a great line from Nick the Greek, who was a classic Vegas character, who said, "I hope I break even today. I need the money." He also said he lost all his money. He jumped up on the roulette table and said, "My body on the 6." So those were days that that those characters were hanging around. But I want to say that the first time I ever got to Vegas was late 1972, and I was out there with a friend. We stayed at Caesar's Palace, and we sat out back. I'll never forget it, about sunset, and the sky turned purple and orange. And the fresh air was so great. And I thought to myself, where has this been all my life? Now, I know Julian preceded me. He was out there in the 60s.
I was.
A whole other incarnation of it, Yeah.
Did either of you ever have dinner in a place called the Bacchanal Room?
Yes, I did.
That was the thing I remember vividly. Is
at Caesars.
At Caesars, the waitress would come at the end and give you a lengthy neck massage after your meal. That was something I'd never heard of in the history of restaurateurs.
Or after you lost all your money.
Well, that was a given.
She said she could do more. She could do more, but it's out in the open,
Yeah.
But anyway.
What I loved about Vegas, and I know I've talked about it, was the lounges, not the big rooms, but the lounges, because for $5-6 minimum. You get 2 drinks, and you'd see the likes of Don Rickles and Mort Saul and Louis Prima and Keely Smith. This was huge talent at that time, playing the lounges for peanut money, and they would do 3 shows a night, 3 shows.
We should stop for a second and acknowledge that Steve Lawrence passed away this week, and I think he was also a regular.
He was a regular. Steve and Edie were one of the greatest shows of all time in Las Vegas or anywhere else.
That's right. I agree. And I saw them in Las Vegas. I saw them in Westbury Music Fair. They were sensational, but they played the big room. They weren't in the lounges at that time. So, okay, let's get to the fact that Sinatra decides with his gang to shoot a movie in Las Vegas called Ocean's 11. We talked about it. Seems that it did well. In fact, I think they said it was the 10th or 12th highest grossing film of that year.
It was a hit, yes.
Despite the reviews, which people didn't care about at all. And then they go on to do Sergeants 3. Note that all the movies they made had a number in it. Ocean's 11, Sergeants 3, Robin and the Seven Hoods, 4 for Texas, always a number. God knows why, but they did. Anyhow, Sergeants 3 was supposedly a loose remake of Gunga Din, except Gunga Din is a brilliant movie and Sergeant 3 is not.
And then there was a great falling out. Apparently, I was interested to read about this. Peter Lawford, at that time, was known as JFK's brother-in-law because he was.
Because he was.
He was, exactly. He had married JFK's sister. And during the election campaign, Sinatra apparently wanted JFK to come out and stay with him at his home. It was in Palm Springs, I believe, right?
It was.
Yeah. And he did a lot of facelifting to make the place comfortable for him. And then I guess according to the history, Robert F. Kennedy turned to his brother and said, you should not be associated with JFK. I'm sorry, you should not be associated with Frank Sinatra because Frank Sinatra has connections to Sam Giancana, the mafioso. So JFK decided not to stay at Sinatra's home, which infuriated the chairman of the board and contributed to the end of his relationship with Peter Lawford, apparently.
It totally did. In fact, to make matters worse, they went to Bing Crosby's house. So it was even worse.
They did that. But, and by the way, that was not RFK who told that. It was his father, Joe Kennedy, who told him this is a no-no. You got to avoid Sinatra. And Joe Kennedy was the guy who brought Sinatra in to take care of things with the mob during the campaign, specifically in Chicago, Illinois. So he was the one who came back and told JFK that you can't stay there. But you know, the rest of the movie Ocean's 11, I always talk about the second half. The first half is still okay. It's a fun movie. Cesar Romero is great. Ilka Chase is in it. You know, it's just a fun movie. Buddy Lester, was it? Buddy Lester was one of those guys.
Buddy Lester, yeah.
Buddy Lester, Clem Harvey, Richard Benedict. The movie was directed by Louis Milestone, one of the great filmmakers known for his war movies. Yes. All Quiet on the Western Front, A Walk in the Sun, Pork Chop Hill. And Milestone was his longtime associate, as was actor Richard Benedict, who plays Curly Steffens as one of the 11. And of course, I remember Roger Cornelius, played by Henry Silva. Henry Silva, I bumped into him at the Oscars one year. He's the only Ocean's 11 person I'd ever met, and he was very nice.
And Richard Conte.
The fact that you bumped into him and he didn't knock you down is really great credit to you.
Who was the actor in that? Who was also in Ace in the Hole and was the guy left in the mine?
In the mine.
He was in that. He was one of the Ocean's 11, and he was in Ace in the Hole. He was kind of on screen for a while, but his whole role was he was kind of caught in the mine, and Kirk Douglas would always go in and be his friend and Tell that story. What a great movie that was.
That is a sensational movie. They even couldn't get a quarter. And then they tried to change it to The Big Carnival, thinking that would change it, but of course it did not. Yeah. But that's a real prescient movie. What's going on in today's world is really started with that kind of a film.
It did.
Anyhow, Lawford I was very surprised to see that he made over 80 movies, Peter Lawford. Over 80.
A lot of MGM movies, Julian.
Yeah, he was on the MGM, but he was doing 2 and 3 movies a year. And he was going to be Alan Adale in Robin Hood, Robin and the Seven Hoods. And when this whole incident happened with Sinatra cut him out, and they got Bing Crosby to come in and play. And, of course, they do that great song about style. You got to have style.
Yeah.
By the way, Arthur, Richard Benedict, who I had just mentioned, who was Lewis Milestone's associate, who plays Curly Steffens, was the guy in Ace.
That was the guy, yes.
That's Richard Benedict. He plays
I had
Leo.
the privilege of meeting with Billy Wilder, and he told me that the greatest picture he ever made that did nothing was Ace in the Hole. He thought that was a fantastic movie, and for some reason, maybe it was dark, so dark, who knows, that it just never did box office.
But it was a terrific film.
What a great movie. Oh, boy.
It really was. You know, the thing about Peter Lawford, the poor guy ended up being an alcoholic, having terrible drug problems. He died at 61 years old. He died quite young.
He was one of the best-looking men that ever lived. He had a physical flaw that I'll bet you none of you are aware of. I found out only because a dear friend of his happened to mention it to me. Are any of you aware of the physical flaw that Peter Lawford had?
Well, it wasn't on his face because he was
let me just tell you, and of course it wasn't his face. He was great looking.
Was it a list?
His right hand was kind of like a claw. And if you ever notice, when in movies, they'll never show his right hand. It's always in a pocket or behind him or something like that. Interesting.
Same with Pat Hingle was missing a pinky on his right hand.
And did he have a club foot, Pat Hingle?
Not that I knew of. Bill Cullen did.
Bill Cullen, yeah, for sure.
Bill Cullen did.
But in Ocean's 11, I think we all have to say that the end of that movie was one of the great, great endings of any movie. When they found out that he was being cremated in the casket with all the money.
Mm-hmm. That was not the original ending, apparently. Apparently, the original ending was they get away in a plane, which crashes, which obviously would have been a pretty down ending. I've walked right by the old Sands. You walk down the sidewalk and you see that wonderful ending where the 10 of the 11 are walking, because we know Richard Conte, who played Tony Bergdorf, had already died of a heart attack.
And a little more trivia on that last scene. The first guy to say to the row as they kept turning to each other, the first guy who mentioned he's being cremated or something, they're burning. What's that noise? What's that noise? And he turns and he starts the chain reaction of everybody talking that they're burning him, which meant the money was burning. That guy was Nicky Blair, who I mentioned recently as Tony Curtis's best friend, who went out with Bernie Schwartz, Tony Curtis, to become Hollywood stars. Nicky Blair played in I don't know how many bit parts in well over 100 movies. He was that guy. Trivia.
Did he end up having a restaurant?
Yes. He had the restaurant, Julian, that Ziggy took over.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that was Nicky Blair's.
Yeah.
Of course, we're talking about Ziggy Gruber, who is our recent guest on our show.
Yeah. Well, we also know that Sinatra cut off Joey Bishop. This Rat Pack was starting to become, and then there was none. But off came Bishop because Sinatra liked Bishop. He was the guy who opened for him for years before the Rat Pack. He was his opening act in a lot of places. And Sinatra's son, Frank Sinatra Jr., was kidnapped, and it was a very traumatic, obviously, experience for Sinatra and the boy. And he was supposed to play, Sinatra, the Calneva Lodge, which he and Dean Martin owned a piece of. And he was pretty emotionally upset, and he asked Joey Bishop if he would sub for him. And Bishop at this time was doing the Joey Bishop show. And his supposedly, the word was that his ego was a little out of control. And he said to Sinatra, I want $50,000 and I want to be flown up there and back if I'm going to do it. And that was the end of Joey Bishop and Frank Sinatra.
That's true.
So that's a rather interesting story. And he wanted that private plane, and Sinatra didn't think that was right. Bishop had a very interesting reputation on that show. He had a terrible temper, extremely angry, firing people left and right. And the only writer that lasted for the 4 years the show was on the air became a very big writer-director, and that was Gary Marshall. Gary Marshall had been a kid starting with on that show, and that's what happened. So,
and who was Joey Bishop's Ed McMahon?
Oh, that was Regis Philbin.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, they decided to see if Joey Bishop could take on Johnny Carson on NBC, and it was like Danny DeVito fighting Mike Tyson.
You know the great Joey Bishop line when he opened for Sinatra at the Copacabana? He comes out, he's to do 10 minutes, and there's people sitting on top of people. There's 9,000. It's ridiculous, the crowd. And Joey Bishop's opening line is, whoa, can you imagine how many people are going to show up when he comes on?
Yeah.
That was his kind of humor, you know?
Now, Sammy Davis and Sinatra had also a bit of a turbulent relationship. Before he comes to Ocean's 11, Sammy was supposed to co-star with Sinatra in a movie called Never So Few, and which was a big war film, takes place in Burma. And Sinatra got into it with Sammy. I'm not quite sure. I know Sammy had gotten into a lot of trouble because of his relationship with, was it Julian? Was it May Britt?
Yeah.
My Brit.
Yeah.
And there was, in those days, there were certain people who did not like black men sleeping with white women, and it caused some turbulence. So I don't know if that's the reason Sinatra had a falling out with Sammy, but Sammy was in Never So Few and then out of Never So Few, and that's how Steve McQueen got the part of Bill Ringa and went on to glory.
The woman that Sammy's problems came about with was not my Brit. He married her. It was Kim Novak. And that's where Harry Cohn got involved.
Harry Cohn.
And told Sammy, in no other words, you need to stop this relationship or else. And he did stop it. In fact, he had to marry somebody. And they just brought in a girl and he married her. Much the same as Rock Hudson had to find somebody that brought in a secretary. Said, you're going to get married to Rock. And those are the days of Hollywood, you know. And but I don't know, Steve, I don't know of any real rift that Sammy Davis had with Sinatra. He idolized Sinatra. And Sinatra.
Oh, it wasn't I don't think it was Sammy having a rift with Sinatra. I think Sinatra had something. There was a rift driven just before Never So Few. That's why Sammy didn't get that role. No. Now they repaired it and went on and did Ocean's 11 and
was
everything.
That movie successful? Do you know? Never So Few.
I think so. They brought in Gina Lollobrigida, who was in fine form, although I had no idea why she was in the movie. It's about guerrillas fighting in the hills of Burma, and all of a sudden, on their leave, Frank Sinatra's with Gina Lollobrigida. But that was the deal in those days. You had to find something for the women, right?
Well, not only that, but so did the men. They needed something for themselves.
You're right. And
what's the next great movie about Vegas beyond Ocean's 11? Would it be Casino? Was there something?
No, I would have to jump right in and say Elvis in Viva Las Vegas with Anne Margaret, 1964. Yeah. That was a hit.
And also Leaving Las Vegas with Nick Cage.
One of the most depressing movies I have ever seen.
But I think it did well, believe it or not.
It did. Well, I think it won the Academy Award. He did. Or Elizabeth Shue, it was unbelievable. Then there's a little movie out of Vegas called The Closer, one of the great underrated movies with Alec Baldwin. It is The Closer.
You're talking about The Cooler.
The Cooler.
Yeah.
We all see that?
I did actually.
I know the director, Wayne Kramer. His wife taught my daughter in second grade. He was a guest on my podcast last year. Wayne Kramer. It's a wonderful focus on old Vegas versus new Vegas.
Yes.
And both Alec Baldwin and I think William H. Macy were both nominated for Oscars that year for that.
Macy was unbelievable as this bad luck guy in that movie. They wanted to cool the guy off, and they just bring him in because he was just bad news. It was a bad beat. He's standing next to a guy who was in a hot streak, and the guy's hot streak would go away. What a job.
And of course, I think we once discussed, all of us, the Albert Brooks movie, the great scene with Gary Marshall when he won,
Lost in America.
Lost in America,
That scene is great, Yeah. Let me get this straight. You want me to give you back all your money? Not only that, put it on a billboard. God, was that great?
I think Buddy Hackett once did a joke when there were propeller planes, which was something like the best way to win in Las Vegas is you get off the plane and go right into the propeller. Put your head right in the propeller.
That was Henny Youngman, just so you know.
Oh, was it Henny Youngman?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, I'm going to ask you guys, have any of you ever worked in Las Vegas?
Well, it depends what you consider work.
Have you done a show there or a film?
Oh, that. Oh, I have not. No.
So in 1991, Disney assigns me, I'm the unit publicist on Honey, I Blew Up the Kid.
Oh, Rick Moranis.
Rick Moranis, exactly. And this is, of course, the sequel to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And this time, Rick Moranis' Wayne Szalinski character doesn't turn his kids into little half-inch characters. He blows up the baby to 40 feet tall. And that was an experience. I had to spend 3 weeks there. And this was before they covered Fremont Street. So they brought out a size, I guess you'd say, a size 200 tennis shoe because you have a 40-foot baby. And they had these 2 tennis shoes, and they were right on Fremont Street in front of the Golden Nugget or one of the hotels there, casinos, and with giant shoelaces. And they had all these scenes around it because there's a 40-foot baby, which, of course, they added in with special effects.
But, Steve, let's get this straight. As we hear it, I think this is either the 3rd or 4th movie sequel that you worked on. You are the king of the sequels.
I am the king.
Porky's 2.
Porky's 2.
Weekend
at Bernie's 2. Eddie and the Cruisers 2. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
How did that happen? What a pigeon.
Getting assigned unit assignments is just luck of the draw. Now, interestingly, a few years earlier, I was assigned to work on a very interesting movie called Desert Bloom. Now, Desert Bloom was out of the Sundance Institute. It was a feature film directed by Eugene Corr, starred Jon Voight, Jo Beth Williams, Columbia Pictures, and it's set in Las Vegas in the year 1951, just during the first nuclear tests. Those were the days when you would pack a picnic lunch and you'd go out to the desert and you'd watch a mushroom cloud. Nobody had any clue that if it blew the certain way, you were going to get radiation. It was just insane. Of course, all the soldiers who were monitored with checking the sites after the blast, they were exposed to all that. But the interesting thing about the movie is, although we actually shot at Hoover Dam, the actual downtown Las Vegas was built in downtown Tucson, Arizona. So they built those fronts of what Las Vegas looked like in 1951 in Tucson. Unfortunately, the executive who really pushed this movie at Columbia ended up leaving the company, so the movie got very little release.
I was in Vegas in 1999, or maybe early 2000. We made a movie called Price of Glory. And they featured it at Cinecom, or whatever it's called, Show West at that time. And I had been going to Vegas for Show West as an exhibitor for many, many years. But something happened several years away from, I hadn't gone for several years. And all of a sudden I walked into the Paris Hotel, and there were literally 5,000 people in this ballroom. I couldn't believe it because they expanded it to worldwide, and they had exhibitors coming in and publicity people and all that. And I didn't recognize it. But that still goes on. Las Vegas, as we all know, has become the magnet to every big thing in entertainment.
It's also become a family experience. I think up until the 60s and into the 70s, Las Vegas was pretty much an adult place. Even as a kid going there, aside from sitting in the lobby watching my mother play slot machines, there wasn't a lot for me to do in Las Vegas. But then they opened
Circus.
The Circus Hotel, exactly, which of course is featured in the only James Bond movie shot in Las Vegas, which was Diamonds Are Forever in 1971, which was a lot of fun. But then the Cirque du Soleil started to come to Las Vegas, all these magic acts, and Las Vegas became, as it's pointed out in that Cooler movie, when Alec Baldwin goes on a rant that old Las Vegas is disappearing, it's become a family destination. So, in fact, when
it totally changed, and what I remembered and which I loved when I went back after the build-up, so to speak, I felt didn't want to go again because it lost what I had loved, the luster of it, the excitement of it, the lounges, the big rooms, and it had become Disneyland for adults, and that was not what I was interested in. But I must say that I do remember that pre-Christmas in the movie theater business, when Arthur and I would own theaters, you would die between about the first week until Christmas. And Las Vegas, when I would go pre-Christmas, was empty. It was really empty. The top people would be playing there because Christmas and New Year's was going to be one of their great weeks. It changed then. Of course, pre-Christmas is gigantic in Las Vegas now.
Julian, to add to that, we would go to Vegas in the late 70s into the early 80s, early December, to the Desert Inn Hotel, and it was as if we owned the hotel. There was no one there.
Yeah.
And it was such a great time to be there because the room, everything was easy, getting meals and all that. And they had a nice, warm, cozy, and of course, the Christmas music was playing, but there weren't that many people. They wouldn't come until post-Christmas. That's what happened. I want to add something to the Rat Pack. The unique part of the Rat Pack, other than the obvious, was that every one of the people in the Rat Pack were solo stars, huge stars on the Vegas Strip. Dean Martin was his own show, Sinatra, of course, Sammy Davis, even Joey Bishop. They all sold out in individual shows. And here they were together on the stage at the same time. And everybody was coming in from Hollywood to watch this. It was the greatest thing that ever happened. It had a magic to it.
Arthur, what was Peter Lawford's contribution to that? Because I did not think
he found the script. He was the producer. He was the guy who got the script. He bought the script.
Well, no. I don't mean Ocean's 11. I'm talking about what was his contribution to, because he was on the stage as well.
He was a song and dance man, Steve. He could sing and dance and act. He was a great entertainer. And he had a pretty good film career, as Julian mentioned. I'm trying to think of, listen, we had a United Artists. I think we had him in, with Sammy Davis, Salt and Pepper. Was that him?
That was the name of it.
Yeah. Salt and Pepper. They made two of them. Lawford was a terrific movie star. I got to meet his son, Chris. Interesting story there, but Chris has passed away. Chris looked just like his father, wrote a great book, and talked in his book about things like how he and his cousins would go up to Central Park to score drugs. It was an incredible book. Peter's son. But I got to meet him, and interesting guy, but I don't want to go any further than that.
I always remember Peter Lawford in a dramatic role. He was Lord Lovat, the British commando, one of the British commando leaders in The Longest Day.
And he was great.
Yeah.
It was really good, really good.
So I think one of his big contributions, Steve, was to introduce JFK to Sinatra. I think that's really probably one of his major things. He also supposedly brought Marilyn Monroe to JFK. So I guess that would be another contribution that
of sorts.
The thing that people don't know, I think that in show business they do, was that Sinatra really helped break the color barrier in Las Vegas. Las Vegas was as bad as any southern state. If you were Nat King Cole or Sammy Davis Jr., you couldn't stay in the hotel. You could be headlining, but you were not permitted to stay in the hotel. You couldn't even swim in the pool. And Sinatra said, that's over. Forget it. Sammy Davis Jr. stays in the hotel. They gave him a suite, and he started to get it broken, that whole horrible racial thing that took place.
Same thing applied with Nat Cole. That's true. That's right.
Funny.
Vegas was basically, in those years, in the 40s and 50s, was just like a southern town. And they catered to a lot of people from the South, and the owners of these hotels believed, who were the mob, just believed they wanted to have them feel comfortable. And so they had Jim Crow in Las Vegas, even though it really didn't exist in California, close by.
That's true. In fact, they even had sometimes big trailers in the parking lot where the black performer who was starring would stay, so that he wouldn't be in the hotel, he'd be in the parking lot.
No.
So we've come a little, thank goodness we've come away from that kind of thinking. Yeah.
Well, terrible, terrible times. But,
by the way, here's a bit of trivia about Ocean's 11. Shirley MacLaine, who was also a member of the Rat Pack through her association with Frank Sinatra, was making The Apartment with Billy Wilder at the time. And she actually flew off to Las Vegas to take that little one-night cameo where she plays the drunken woman who has an encounter with Dean Martin.
Yeah, it's true. They call them mascots. They were known as the mascots. Angie Dickinson, Marilyn Monroe, Shirley MacLaine, they were known as the mascots.
Joy Lansing was fun.
Yeah.
But there was a great group. They had nothing but fun. I told you I met this guy, Lou Gallo, who was much older at the time and had a big mustache and a hat, and I wouldn't recognize him. And he told me he was in a lot of movies, and I said, oh, yeah, I was in Ocean's 11. You were? And it turns out that he was. There was a small part in the movie. You'll see Lou Gallo. He was also in PC 109.
He plays Patricia Wymark's boyfriend. I met him at Showtime in the 90s. Lou Gallo, like Richard Benedict, was a close friend of Louis Milestone. And the reason he's in PT 109 is that Louis Milestone was going to direct PT 109 and cast him in it. But Louis Milestone was fired by Brian Foy and replaced with another director.
But Steve, how did they come about Louis Milestone for Ocean's 11, considering his track record? How did that happen, you know?
Well, Louis Milestone is a pretty eclectic director. He also directed Mutiny on the Bounty, the Marlon Brando Mutiny on the Bounty. So he didn't just do war pictures. I think he did Mice and Men. He was a pretty brilliant director and had a good reputation. And since Ocean's 11 was a Warner's title, I think he had a very good relationship with Warner's. That's why I think they chose him.
Yeah, well, interesting. But Sinatra would have had a lot to do with that choice, so he must have liked him as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Lou Gallo also pops up in Pork Chop Hill. He's also in a couple of Twilight Zone episodes. Really nice guy. Very nice guy.
No, I mean, and Louis Milestone was prestigious. That was a prestigious director to get at that time in 1960. So I'm sure that was another reason he wanted to do it.
Interesting that Sinatra breaks the color barrier in Vegas in the same year that Kirk Douglas basically puts
Alton
Trumbo's name on Spartacus, which was also 1960.
And also we know that Otto Preminger put on
Exodus.
On Exodus, yeah.
No, exactly. 1960 was a big year in terms of the beginning of the 60s.
And JFK gets elected. Yeah.
And isn't that the year the Pittsburgh Pirates win the World Series on Bill Zarowski's home run?
Yes.
Yeah.
With Yogi Berra going back to the wall.
It's funny you should say that. I always thought Yogi Berra was a catcher.
He was a catcher, but in 1960 he was the left fielder, and when they had Elston Howard catching.
Oh, okay. So he wasn't very tall, so his mitt wouldn't go very far.
He couldn't get over that wall. That wall was much too high for. It would have been too high for Aaron Judge. It was,
That's right.
Very high wall. But anyway, Ocean's 11, the Rat Pack will live forever. The movie was terrific. It plays all the time.
Well, it was remade, of course, with George Clooney's as Ocean's 11, which I
Yes.
actually thought was a pretty good movie. And of course, that spawned two sequels, Ocean 12, which I didn't think was very good, but Ocean's 13 is back in Las Vegas with Al Pacino. Good movies.
But I love that they took the place of Akim Tamiroff, who was in Ocean's 11, a great little role. Akim Tamiroff was Carl Reiner, right? He became Carl Reiner in Ocean's 11 with Clooney and the guy.
I think so, although I would say it was also the guy...
Different kind of guy.
Who's Barbara Streisand's ex-husband? Well, Elliot Gould. I think Elliot Gould is kind of like the Akim Tamiroff character.
Yes.
A little bit.
Well, we should talk a little bit about Four for Texas, because once again, Sinatra, Dean Martin are in it. This time they get two of the most beautiful, sexy women, Ursula Andress and Anita Ekberg. And speaking of directors, Arthur, they get Robert Aldrich to direct. So the packages they could put together. They couldn't necessarily make very good movies by and large, but they could put together good packages.
Well, there was a supporting actor who played in those things called Dickie Bacalian, Richard Bacalian. You'd see his face and you would know Dick in a second. He was in Von Ryan's Express with Sinatra. He was in the Robin and the Seven Hoods. And he was really part of that. He was another part of that whole clan or family or what have you. And Dick was a great, great guy. He came from Watertown, Massachusetts, was in a lot of movies. Again, if anybody doesn't know the name, check it out and you'll see his face. I know that guy.
He's in the only movie directed by Frank Sinatra, which is called None But the Brave.
Yes.
Which was a World War II movie set on a Pacific island. And Dickie's in that movie with Brad Dexter and Clint Walker and Tommy Sands. And a good little war.
Well, Tommy Sands was a son-in-law, right? And so he had family.
Yep.
They had mashpucha. I asked Dick one time, what's it like when Frank gets angry? Have you ever seen him get angry? He said, you don't want to know about it. The great story when Don Rickles is having dinner with his wife and Sinatra and his wife and a couple other people, and the fancy restaurant, and somehow the waiter brings a bottle of ketchup to Sinatra's in his fancy restaurant, and Sinatra said so angry that he would do such a thing. How do you bring a bottle of ketchup to a fancy place? And he picks up the bottle, throws it against the wall, and the ketchup splatters all over the place. And Don Rickles then asked him, Frank, could you pass the ketchup, please?
Yeah.
You better not do something like that at the Bellagio restaurant. Don't they? I think it's there's a restaurant at the Bellagio called Picasso's. And on all the walls of Picasso's are Picassos just sitting there. I mean, I often think about if somebody gets into a fight and throws a ketchup bottle, they could destroy a Picasso.
Is that Steve Wynn's hotel?
No, that's the Bellagio. I don't know if he owns the Bellagio.
Are they real Picassos?
They're real Picassos.
Wow.
I did a double take. The thing about Las Vegas, it's always been a town of excess. I remember the second time I went to Las Vegas as a kid, we stayed at the Flamingo. Of course, that's Bugsy Siegel's or Ben Siegel's hotel. We had our own pool. They were called the pool suites. There were like 10 of them in the back. I don't know how my dad got one, but we had a pool suite. We literally had our own swimming pool. It was pretty crazy.
Did you ever gamble in Vegas and win, Steve?
Yes. In fact, my last trip,
I had a great theory, and I actually kept to it. Whatever I decided I could afford to lose, the second I lost it, whatever it was, that was the end. I was able to stop, no matter what it was, and occasionally I would win, but I only played 21. I only played blackjack. I never played anything but.
That's very good of you, Julian. It's a form of portion control. I think you're able to deal with that.
In 1986, March, I had Barbara and our little son Nick out at Vegas. We were at the Desert Inn. I had a big feeling that the Boston Red Sox, who had finished almost in last place the year before, would win the pennant. And I went into the futures thing and wound up in a hotel called the Barbary Coast, where I saw the Red Sox for 25-1 to win the pennant. 30-1 to win the World Series. This is a futures bet. So this is March of that year. I had a nice run at the table. It's a blackjack table. I had $2,000 in my pocket. I put $2,000 on the Red Sox to win the pennant. In 1986, the Red Sox won the pennant with Roger Clemens. And I went in November, and I went to collect my money, $50,000 plus $52,000. And the guy who gave it to me, the manager of the hotel, said, "We've been waiting for you," because it had happened, of course, in October. And this was now November. And he said, "We follow these futures, and you were the only one as of Labor Day that was still alive." What a feeling that was. Wow.
How about that?
Yeah,
that paid
story.
for a few Ziggy's Mountain High sandwiches.
Only 5 sandwiches you could buy for $50,000.
All I know is you better put that in your book.
Oh, it's in there. Of course, it's a great story. I was legendary for that. Of course, all of my Hollywood friends loved gambling and what have you, and they followed that bet with me. Hey, Arthur, the Red Sox are alive, and of course.
All right, Steve. Steve, before we go, you're going to sum up. But who do you have on this week?
Oh, this week I have on Jake Cherry. And although that name doesn't come bouncing off as a big star, he was Ben Stiller's son in the very successful Night at the Museum movies. And Jake has an interesting story. He's now getting out of acting. He's going to law school, and he wants to become an entertainment attorney. We talk all about the making of that wonderful movie Night at the Museum, which was a huge hit. And I was just going to say,
did you work on a sequel as a unit publicist?
No, I didn't work on it. It's so funny because I haven't done a unit assignment in 30 years. But excuse me, my last unit assignment was 1992. So it's been it's over 30 years, 32 years.
One of these days we want to hear what hear you tell about your days as a unit publicist and what you did and how that all went.
Sure. I mean, it was like being a kid at Christmas, a movie lover working on a film set every day. Just couldn't top that.
All kidding aside, did you say you worked on Caddyshack 2 as well?
No, I did not work on Caddyshack.
Okay.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I was just going to say
there'll be another Jaws maybe one day.
It's always Julian. It's always the second one he works on. It's the second.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
anyway, Julian, who do you have on your show coming up?
I have David Mamet.
Wow.
A biggie.
And
Glenn Gary.
And he's fast talking, he's profane, and he's very, very, really good on it. He really was quite something.
Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, The Verdict.
And The Verdict.
The Untouchables.
Yeah.
And a movie I love, The House of Games or the House of
Games. Oh, yes.
Great little movie.
Yeah.
I met him. His daughter and my daughter were in school together, and I went over to the Mammon House once and got to hang out with David a little bit. That was fun.
Was Rebecca there as well?
Yes. I met her too. Getting back to gambling, I did win on my last trip to Vegas because I learned to play craps properly. I'm a crap shooter, and I wasn't playing the idiotic bets, which I used to do a lot. Now I don't play the idiotic bets, and I won $235, which was a big win for me, Arthur. It wasn't $50,000, but it was $235. We have come to the end of our show, guys. This has been great. I mean, we could talk Vegas forever. It's hard not to have a good time in Las Vegas. If you've made it this far on our show, please subscribe. We love subscribers. We love when you interact with us. If you'd like to email us, you can email us at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. We have a YouTube, Tales from Hollywoodland. You'll find us. And we definitely like hearing from you. If you have any suggestions for guests or topics, we would like to hear from you.
EO11.
Well, we're leaving Las Vegas, guys.
Yes. And Ocean's 11 to you. Have a great week, everybody.
Take care, guys.
Check out the Modern Musicology Podcast, where each week we talk about things like
what makes a great drummer,
our favorite rock documentaries,
songs we love by artists we don't love,
our favorite concert memories,
songs that should have been singles,
and all of our favorite music from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now.
Do not use Modern Musicology if you're allergic to it. Modern Musicology may produce itching, dizziness, vertigo, temporary blindness, or heart palpitations. Do not taunt Modern Musicology.
Ask your doctor about switching to Modern Musicology.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.